Madam Chair. I want to pick up on an issue that Senator Merkley raised about the partisanship versus bipartisanship nature of this whole conversation. When we're in Washington, in the Capitol, many of our Republican colleagues talk about the need for bipartisanship if we're going to be amending or changing voting rights laws or election laws, and how Democrats should not pass voting rights protections on a party line basis. That's what they tell us. Now, look, I agree. We shouldn't have to. Defending our fundamental right to vote should not be a partisan issue. It should be a non-partisan issue. And just last week in a Judiciary Committee hearing, reminded our colleagues, both sides of the aisle, of this radical concept I think we all were taught in high school government class, that our democracy works best when as many eligible people participate. We actually went around the table with the witnesses, both Democratic witnesses and Republican witnesses, and asked the question if they agreed or if they disagreed. Of course, they all agreed. Our democracy is stronger when more eligible people participate, not less. But unfortunately, our Republican colleagues' deeds don't match their words. They'll say publicly that they support voting rights, but their actions show something different. Now, indeed, when a lot of our Republican colleagues in the Senate minority held up democracy expanding legislation like the For the People Act in Washington, they stay silent when their Republican colleagues in state house after state house after state house across the country are ramming through voter suppression laws without input from Democratic colleagues in those very same state houses. Now, in the news these days is dozens of legislators from Texas that have left the state to break quorum in an effort to block these voter suppression laws. They're in Washington, bring their advocacy there. Texas is the most recent example, but clearly in calendar year 2021, Georgia was the first. I have a question for Senator Harrell. I know you touched on this in your earlier testimony. You serve on the Ethics Committee, and you saw the change in SB 202 from an original 2-page bill to a 98-page bill that was passed by the House, then by the Senate. Can you describe, just shed a little bit more light on how bipartisan or collaborative the process was in the Georgia State House, or how it wasn't?
There was not an ounce of bipartisanship. And there wasn't back when we had the voting machine legislation either. Amendments were brought forward. They were immediately opposed. 0 amendments were accepted. So I've never seen anything like it, really. It's extremely disappointing.
Thank you. And, because I care so much, for those who may not be aware, prior to joining the Senate, I served as California Secretary of State. I served as the Chief Elections Officer for the state with the largest population, the most diverse population. I'm proud that there we built the most inclusive democracy, maintaining the security, integrity of our elections, but making it easier for eligible voters to register, to stay registered, and to be able to cast their ballot. And so I've tried to figure out where our Republican colleagues are going with this or what they're thinking. And I've heard in event after event, in committee after committee, their mantra. They'll start a lot of their presentations and discussions and debates with a simple line that they're just trying to make it easier to vote and harder to cheat. Have you heard that?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the phrase clearly made its way here to Georgia too.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to highlight that we all got the second part down right, the harder to cheat. because study after study, investigation after investigation, commission after commission, all shows the same thing. As Senator Merkley said, voter fraud in America is exceedingly, exceedingly rare. Election official after election official has stood up for the integrity of the process, including the Georgia Republican Secretary of State, saying publicly there's zero evidence of any widespread or systematic voter fraud, even standing up to pressure from the former president of the United States. Yet we see Republicans forcing through bills, as I mentioned, state house after state house, including SB 202 here in Georgia. So it makes us wonder, what is their true motive? But they've forgotten the first part of their equation, the easier to vote. And let me not reference the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Let me insert into the conversation here today the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, which was adopted on a bipartisan basis. Oh, how times have changed. But let me read Section 2 of the National Voter Registration Act, and I'll be brief here. In the findings, the Congress finds that the right of citizens of the United States to vote is a fundamental right. And it goes on to say it is the duty of the federal, state, and local governments to promote the exercise of that right. Pretty clear to me. So should we not be better focused, if we have the election security piece down, putting more energy and effort onto what it is that truly makes it easier for eligible people to vote, and focus on the issues of long lines, focus on the issues of unfair provisional ballot policies, focus on maybe making it so that more people can vote by mail without needing an excuse, without having to be of a certain age, all these things. So again, and maybe with Senator Harrell, then we'll go to Ms. Butler and Mr. Segura, one or two examples of SB 202 as, are we making it easier to vote? Or were we violating the National Voter Registration Act and not facilitating people's participation in our democracy? Senator.
Yes, I wanted to actually correct myself. When I said 0% bipartisan support, I'd like to change that to 2%. Because I remember that there were two Democratic bills, small Democratic bills that were included in Senate Bill 202. One was to allow absentee ballots to be scanned prior to Election Day in order to speed up the counting. This was something that was done during emergency rule that they codified. The second was a colleague of mine had a bill that required signage to be put up, 4x4 signs at precinct places that had closed or were changed. And that bill was included in Senate Bill 202. So since I am testifying under oath, I wanted to clarify that I wanted to up the 0% to 2% participation.
Okay, excellent. Anyone else want to add anything? Okay.
You said what would make that it would make it easy to vote? Well, I think
or harder. I'm just trying to vet
well,
out.
one of the hard things, of course, is out of the provisional ballot process. Out of precinct voting would make it more difficult for people to exercise their right to vote, as opposed to what is required under HAVA to allow them to do that. So to me, that is a provision that needs to be corrected to allow people to vote provisionally.
Mr. Scar.
I think we have seen examples of the bad. I think one example of the good is expand the voting window for the early voting to 3 weeks. I think it's very important that people have more time to exercise that constitutional right.
Thank you. I'll just end with a quick note because I know I'm way over my time, but this before 5 versus after 5 on the one hand, some people can say that's completely arbitrary.
Mhm.
I don't think so. I've seen elections not just as an elections official, not just as a candidate, not just as a voter, as an organizer. Hey, working folks, there's a
Mhm.
surge when you
Okay.
get off of work to go vote on election day. So those who are impacted before and after, it is not proportional. Thank
A
you.
lot of our first responders wouldn't be able to actually exercise their right to vote.
Right. Very good.
I
Thank you.
actually filed a bill that would allow people to vote in any precinct. We do that during early voting already. You can go
Yeah.
anywhere in the county and cast your
In the
vote.
county, you're talking about in the county.
In the county, in the
Right.
county, you can vote anywhere in the county during early voting. We have the technology now to do that. The old precinct idea of voting at your polling place was before we had that technology. So I actually filed a bill that would allow you to vote in any precinct within your county on election
I'd be
day.
happy to answer any questions for any of your colleagues if they're wondering, because Colorado has that, what they call vote centers. California does. Arizona, Nevada during the early voting period. So
You
you're
see why
moving in
we're
the right
so
direction.
lucky to have Senator Padilla on this committee.
Yes.
Not only does he know his
Yes.
stuff, but he takes the red eye to get here. Next up.